Tales from the Break Room is a viewer submission podcast. Send us your scariest stories that happened at work at darkstories.org so we can narrate them on the show. And check out eeriecast.com for more creepy podcasts like this, and to shop at our store. Oh, and you can follow me on Twitter too, at Prevails. Thank you.
Hi, welcome to Dead and Roasted. What can I get you?
Demons are a lot like coffee. If you get too close, it attaches itself to you. Breaking that attachment calls for strength from the heavens, and you get the runs. Now, thanks to Dead and Roasted's new Brimstone Roast, you can have both caffeine and demons. Warning, side effects include sleeplessness, anxiety, irritability, sleep paralysis, nightmares, death, and eternal damnation. Anyway, look who's back to help me test out this new flavor. It's you. And speaking of demons, I have some new and allegedly true scary work stories to share with you today. It's gonna be a spooky one, so strap in. These are tales from the break room. Haunted by a little girl. From Anonymous. I worked in a senior living facility in the memory care unit. And one of the creepiest days I experienced was about 3 years into working there. It started like any normal day. It was my Friday and I wanted to get through the day quickly to enjoy my weekend. I began by tending to my residents, going into one room to help dress a lady. At the moment, I was kneeling on the floor putting on her TED hose when she pointed to her old chair and warned me to "Be careful of that little girl." I chuckled, not taking it seriously. After all, it was a memory care unit, and this particular resident often saw things and had peculiar experiences. I escorted her to the living room with her walker and continued with my duties. I skipped the next 2 rooms since one was vacant, and the other resident was receiving hospice care. I proceeded to the second room and encountered a similar situation. As I helped the resident get up and dressed, she pointed to her chair and exclaimed, "Oh, the little girl." This time I felt a chill down my spine. This resident rarely spoke, usually responding with a simple no. I hurriedly finished dressing her and escorted her to the living room. I then went to check on my male resident. I first knocked on his door to ensure he was awake and ready, since he could manage independently. He opened his door and asked, "What are you guys doing here?" I laughed and replied, "What do you mean, you guys?" He responded, "You and that little girl." I tried to brush it off, saying, "All right, I'll see you at breakfast." Feeling uneasy now, I went to find my medication technician. I informed her that I needed to go home because, apparently, a little girl was following me, and I didn't know what she wanted. We laughed it off, finished our day, and I went home without dwelling on it too much. I enjoyed my weekend and returned to work afterwards. I was refreshed, ready to tackle my tasks. A coworker whom I hadn't seen since a few days prior approached me and said, "Hey, I had a weird dream about you." Curious, I asked, "Oh, really? What was it about?" She proceeded to describe the dream, saying that a little girl was following me, and eventually she set me on fire. I chuckled nervously and replied, "All right. Who told you about what happened on Thursday?" To my surprise, she replied, "What? No one. I didn't work yesterday, I was sick. Today is my first day back." I was completely freaked out. During my nearly 10 years at the facility, occasional residents would inquire about the little girl. She was only seen when I was present and always seemed to be near me. I had no idea who she was or what she wanted, but the mysterious encounters still give me goosebumps. Voices during the Whiteout, from Ragnarok 16. I've had a number of experiences with the paranormal my entire childhood, and even into my adult life. My family seems to have been plagued by haunted homes for 2 to 3 generations. I've learned a lot about how energy can be carried and trapped and even replayed when the conditions are right. This happened during my time attending college. I'm from a small town in Indiana, and I was working part-time at a Subway restaurant to help pay for my college. During the winter, roughly 2019 and 2020, there was a terrible snowstorm. People were told not to be on the roads unless absolutely necessary. But our store owner was a cheapskate and refused to let us close and go home early. I was a shift lead at the time, the one responsible for closing the store up at night, along with one extra employee. That night, I was tagged up with a good friend who worked with me, named R. R and I were doing our usual cleanup duties. When we were done, we sat in the lobby and played on our phones between cleanups. The snow was coming down hard, and the store had become almost deathly quiet, save for the sounds of the machines and refrigerators that were still running. We were in the back of the store, cleaning dishes and putting away prepped food for tomorrow, when suddenly we heard a voice call from up front. I couldn't make out what exactly they said. To me, it just sounded like a normal customer calling for attention or assistance at the counter. We both froze and looked at each other. You see, there was a doorbell that went off when a customer entered the building. It even indicated which door had been opened. However, we had not heard the doorbell. That would have been impossible because it sits right over the prep table I was leaning on. I stood and poked my head around the doorway. To my shock, the lobby was empty, and there were no cars outside. You almost couldn't see outside due to the intense snow. R asked if someone was there, and I said no. R is a skeptic. He kind of just furrowed his brow and shrugged before returning to the dishes. I tried to shake off the odd experience and continue my work too. Later that night, we were sitting in the lobby talking about something when we heard the doorbell go off, and I heard the little indicator alarm say, "Back door." We both stared at each other. No one comes in from the back door except managers or the owner. But neither of them would be out in this blizzard. We both got up to go check in the back. Lo and behold, no one was there. We were definitely starting to get freaked out. As we were about to walk back into the lobby, we heard what sounded like the mop slamming to the ground. It had a fiberglass handle that made a very loud and distinct smacking noise when it fell. We went right back into the kitchen and found the mop, which was standing up like it should be. Nothing else had fallen either. Nothing that we could find. Our adrenaline was ramping up now. R, despite being a skeptic to the paranormal, still got spooked pretty easily by stuff like this. Right before we turned to head toward the lobby again, R visibly jumped. His eyes were huge and full of fear. He grabbed me by the shoulders. It was almost like he was about to use me as a shield. I was and still am about twice his size. "Dude, tell me you heard that." I shook my head and replied, "I didn't. What was it? What's got you so freaked out?" R was nearly panting. He was so scared. "Dude, don't mess with me. You had to have heard that." I once again said I hadn't. "Dude, something just, screamed, right in my ear." That freaked me out more now. I've had things whisper to me before, but I had never heard of something screaming in your ear. I told him to go back to the lobby. We could just chill in there. R hurried past me and went to our booth in the lobby. I sat with him while we tried to calm our nerves. We heard more voices coming from the back, muffled, like you couldn't quite make out what they were saying. We could identify two voices, a man's and a woman's, speaking back and forth. We stared at the kitchen door the entire time, expecting to see someone, but we didn't, and we did not go back there again until we had to. A couple of hours later, we closed the store down, but we were on edge for the rest of the night. I even lost track of my count several times, because I was just waiting for something else to happen. I have no idea what it was my friend heard, or what either of us had heard that night, but it never did happen again. I should note there's a railroad that runs behind the store, and the railroad tracks run right over the old haunted bridge of Avon, Indiana. Could the storm have rustled up some of that trapped energy from the tracks, sending wayward souls into our store? Or did we just start getting nutty from the isolation of the blizzard? Whatever it was, I'm just glad we never experienced it again. Somehow, R remains a skeptic even to this day, but I think that experience might have shaken his beliefs just a little bit. I fought a demon and won. From Visigoth. In July of 2000, I was forced to confront the fact that all the stories and myths I'd ever heard about demons were true. They are real, they are evil, and they want and are able to kill the living. I grew up in a Catholic household in the Midwest. My home life was very chaotic, mostly as a result of my veteran father dealing with his shell shock by drinking excessively and getting in fights at poker games. My father had a hard time keeping a job, and we never seemed to have any money. My mom and dad argued constantly, and we moved frequently, so I never really felt any sense of comfort or stability at home. Just when I made some neighborhood friends or got into a rhythm at school, we would pack up and move, and I would be the new kid all over again. Years and years of living like this made me grow to resent my family, my community, and even my faith, which I decided at one point was just a scam to scare gullible people and line the pockets of the clergy. I never had any friends, so I put all my effort into my schoolwork. I got a scholarship to a university hours away from home. I studied psychology and criminal justice, with the intent of becoming an FBI agent or a lawyer. I graduated with honors. After that, I immediately moved to California, leaving my former life and dysfunctional family behind. Everything changed for me in California. I got a great job working for a private investigation firm. I met a free-spirited, exotic young woman, and after dating for 6 months, we moved in together. My girlfriend, Salem, had a dark sense of humor. She liked much heavier music than I did and was into spiritualism, which I considered total bunk at the time. However, she did contrast my rather stoic and staid personality perfectly, so we got along really well. She was very attractive to me, and that may have clouded my judgment somewhat. Salem was always going on and on about crystals, psychics, and other esoteric topics, which I thought were just harmless hobbies of hers. She would go to psychic fairs every other week or so, and always wanted me to go with her, but I never would. Finally, after months and months of pestering me to go with her, I agreed to attend one for her. It was not what I imagined it to be. For some reason, I thought it would be more like a Renaissance fair or something, with Gothic decorations and candles everywhere, everyone wearing robes and pointy hats. Instead, it was held in a cramped little bland outlet in a strip mall. There were a dozen or so psychics giving different types of readings, from tea leaves to tarot cards, and all manner of retail items for sale, primarily books, crystals, and herbs. Salem had a reading, then another from a different person, then another. Eventually, I was very bored and a little weirded out by some of the people there. But I just stayed by her side and kept my opinions to myself. Before we left, she bought a small purple crystal sphere that looked exactly like I always pictured a crystal ball to look, as well as a small pedestal for it to rest on. After that, we went home. That very same night, for the first time in my life, I stopped breathing in my sleep. I woke straight up, gasping for air. Sure, I know, there are numerous explanations for this to happen, but I was in my early 20s at the time and in great physical shape. I'd been studying martial arts for years, and I'd even taken up surfing once moving to California. My sudden case of breathlessness scared Salem, but I just blew it off as some sort of weird fluke. The next night, it happened again, only this time I opened my eyes and I was awake when I realized I wasn't breathing. I could hear myself making a gurgling, choking sound. I then bolted up in bed and began gasping for air again. Now, I was scared too. Being a logical person, I got on the internet and began searching for possible reasons for what had happened to me. Sleep apnea seemed to be the most likely explanation, but I'd never had it before in my life, and it wasn't supposed to continue happening to you after you wake up. Keep in mind, the second occurrence I was wide awake. While still at my computer, I turned around. I was just kind of ruminating on things when my gaze fell upon the crystal sphere that Salem had placed on the entertainment center above our television. I then turned back to my computer, typing in "dangers of crystals" into the search engine. The top two results were about the spiritual dangers of the uninitiated using crystals. The third and fourth results were about what the Bible says about crystals. I dove down an internet rabbit hole that lasted hours and consumed my thoughts. I didn't believe in spirituality, witches, demons, angels, or any of that stuff. But for some reason, I could not stop digging deeper and deeper into the topic. I read website after website about sacred stones in the occult, about how some believe crystals can be used to communicate with spiritual entities or even open a gateway to other dimensions. After every article or blog, I would shake my head and basically tell myself, yeah, right. But I just kept on searching and reading until I began to fixate on the crystal being the root of my problems. Still, it was just a hunk of rock, wasn't it? How could it possibly affect my sleep? There's no logical way that it could, right? One day, Salem came home from her sister's house. The two of us had a nice evening together. I didn't mention anything about the crystal or spending my days searching the dark corners of the internet for solutions to my sleep problem. We stayed up late watching a movie, and she fell asleep on the couch. I carried her to bed and went to sleep myself. She slept on the left side of the bed, me on the right. That night, it happened again. I woke up aware that I was suffocating. I tried to sit up and take a breath like I had the last time, but I could not sit up. I could not breathe. What little air that happened to go through my nose brought with it the scent of a terrible foul odor of wet earth and decay. The entire right side of my face felt frozen, like my head was being held next to an open freezer. Still gasping for air, I turned my head to the right, and there, inches from my face, was a man. Well, male in form, but it was not just a man. It was a creature, an entity, a demon. This wasn't a dream, not a hallucination, definitely not sleep paralysis, which seems to be the catch-all excuse for scientists, as I was able to turn my head and look at it. It was there. It was real. The demon was, I assumed, hunched on the floor, just off the side of the bed. I could only see its head and the tops of its shoulders peeking up over the top of our bed. It leaned in toward me, jutting its narrow, pointy chin over the side of the bed in my direction. Its head was large and bulbous and hairless. Its skin was a gray-brown, undulating mass of wrinkles, warts, scabs, and tumors. The eye sockets were large, angular, and hollow. It had no eyes to speak of, but deep down within its eye sockets, what seemed like 1,000 feet within them, were 2 pinpricks of yellow light that were its eyes. The nose was bulbous and drooped down nearly to its mouth, which was another black chasm with a handful of gnarled teeth and rotten gums. It was the source of the cold that I felt on my face and the damp odor that filled my nostrils. Now, I grew up rough. I got in many fights as a kid, and as a young man, I hunted and fished with my dad. I'd even encountered real-life gangsters in both America and Mexico as a private investigator. But nothing had ever come close to scaring me as much as that man, thing, or demon. It was like every cell in my body vibrated in horror all at once, desperate to escape it. I could not comprehend what I was seeing, but I knew it was pure evil. It never talked, it never moved, though its mouth did quiver ever so slightly, and the yellow pinpricks of lights in its eye sockets twinkled. It just stared at me, or through me. When I tried to sit up, I heard my own voice in my head say, "Stay in bed." It was my voice, but not my thought. Finally, after I don't know how long, seconds, minutes, or hours, I tore my gaze away from it, and I sat up in bed, gasping and coughing for air. Then I screamed so loudly, I terrified Salem and woke up our landlord across the hall, who began to pound on our front door. Salem answered the door and told him that everything was fine, but she would not come back to bed with me, instead choosing to sleep on the couch. I was so drained, so utterly exhausted, that I passed out almost immediately after that and slept through the night. When I woke up the next day, I was alone. Salem had gone to work already. My bed sheets were utterly soaked in sweat, so I gathered them up and put them in a basket to wash them. The laundry room was down the hall from our apartment, right next to an old-style metal chute for the trash. Without even thinking, I just immediately tossed my sheets and pillowcases down the garbage chute, rather than taking them into the laundry room. I went back to my apartment, and the very first thing that caught my eye was the purple crystal, which had reflected the morning light and was casting a purple beam across the wall opposite the entertainment center. The thing made me feel nervous and anxious. I didn't want to look at it. In fact, I hated it. Without a thought, I walked over, picked it up, squeezed it tight, and yelled, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I cast you out!" I hadn't been to church in over a decade, and I'd stopped praying long before that. But in that instant, I somehow knew what to say, what to do. Maybe I'd seen too many horror movies or whatever, but that's what I did. And believe me, writing this out and reading it back to myself, I know how utterly foolish it sounds for a grown adult, a well-educated private investigator no less, to yell something like that in an empty room. Nevertheless, that's what I did, that's what I said. And the very second I uttered that last word, I heard a rather quiet pop, and I felt warmth in my hand. I opened my fist to see that the crystal had cracked from the inside out. From the very center of this extremely hard piece of purple crystal, there was a 6-pointed, star-shaped crack that extended nearly to the surface of the sphere. I couldn't believe that it happened, but it did. I felt amazed, relieved, but also terrified, because that meant that the demon was real after all. I ran out into the hallway and down to the garbage chute tossing the crystal and its pedestal down into the black abyss of the chute. When Salem got home from work, I made up some story about our cat knocking her crystal off of the entertainment center. She shrugged it off. That night, I slept soundly, and I slept soundly every night after that. I broke up with Salem shortly thereafter, and I moved on with my life. I've never once stopped breathing in my sleep since, and I've never had any other experiences like it. I found my way back to a semblance of faith, and thankfully, I never encountered anything like that creature, that demon, again. Though it did seem to open up some awareness to other things. That demon was real. It wanted to kill me, and it very easily could have. I know that now, and I try not to think about it. And I've never told a single soul about it, because I know what people will think, and I have my reputation to protect. But when I do think about it, I can see it clear as day in my mind's eye. I can feel the cold malice of it, and almost smell it. I fought that demon, and I won. But I pray to God I never have to do something like that again. I do not judge or condemn people who consider themselves spiritual, or practice divination, or those who believe in psychics or witches or whatever. Nor do I believe that they're inherently bad or evil at all. What I want people to realize is that yes, there are entities out there that are not human. We can see them, we can feel them, and we can experience them. And some of them, they want to hurt you and possibly kill you. If you're going to mess around with that sort of thing, do your research and protect yourself. Weirdo at the hospital. From Billy T. This story is from a friend. He's given me permission to share it. I'll tell it from his perspective. I work overnight as a security guard at the local hospital. Most nights are quite tame, while the rare one can be exciting, ranging from drunks urinating in the hallways to psychiatric patients smearing waste on the walls. However, one particular night will haunt me for the rest of my life. I was heading to my next post, with the first half of my shift already behind me that night. I sat down at my station and began doing some mundane paperwork. My station is situated in front of the waiting room, where people patiently sit to be seen. Tonight, the waiting room is empty, except for one man. He appears unassuming, sitting alone on a bench, hands in his pockets. At the time, I didn't pay much attention to him and continued with my paperwork. After only a few minutes of signing documents and initialing papers, something triggered my instincts. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, telling me that I needed to pay attention to something. Well, I looked up, and I see that man now swiftly scurrying out of my line of sight. I turned and watched him closely as he hid in the corner of the triage area, rummaging through his pocket and quickly shoving something inside. This made me nervous, but I still had a job to do. "Hey, what are you doing over there?" I called out to him. The man turned slightly, holding a cigarette in his hand, and replied with a low voice, "I'm just smoking." Of course, smoking is not allowed in the hospital, so I inform him of this and walk towards him as he began to make his way out of the hospital. As I approached him, he reached into his pocket, and what he pulled out sent a chill down my spine. It was the handle of a pistol, a real gun. His fingers were wrapped around it. Unsure if it was a genuine weapon or a novelty lighter or something along those lines, I was not about to find out tonight. I stopped in my tracks and watched in shock as he walked out through the glass doors. But then he turned back to me, a twisted smile across his face. He crouched in the doorway before he turned away and disappeared into the darkness of the night. When my nerves finally came back, I called for help and waited for my team to arrive. I don't know if I'll ever come across something as terrifying again. If I do, I'll make sure to call for backup beforehand. Becky is haunted. From Aaron LC. This story is not centered around a particular event. Instead, it surrounds one person who I knew over a 4-year span. I worked as a cook at the time in a catering service that would work at different sites around where I lived, in southern Ontario, Canada, about 2011. It was a small operation of about 5 of us. We all had our roles to play. I was working with a coworker named Becky at the home kitchen, where we would prepare meals to varying degrees, then deliver them out to the sites before the event. We would then return later in the night to collect the dishes, service containers, and any other equipment to bring back for cleaning. It meant I got to know Becky very well. She was a bit of an oddball, same as many kitchen staff I'd met over the years. Over those years, we spent hundreds of hours talking about anything and everything. We got along very well as a team. I learned quite early in our time that she never liked talking about the paranormal, and eventually she opened up about why that was. She claimed that since she was a young teenager, we were both in our mid-20s at the time, she had been followed by a ghost that seemed to be upset whenever they were talked about. The way she explained it was, she had been in a car accident when she was 14, in which a few cars and I believe 8 people were involved. Sadly, 2 of those people died in the accident, whereas Becky walked away with a few bruises. It was a few weeks after that crash where she began to notice things happening around her. She'd returned to normal life, staying late at school due to basketball practice a few nights of the week. It meant she would have to walk home well after everyone at the school had already left. On that walk, she recalled feeling the sensation of being watched and hearing footsteps always off the wooded path she would take home. Those moments were easy enough for her to dismiss as echoes or something else. But it was the things that followed that really began to make her question the situation. In her bedroom, she had a walk-in closet. After coming home from school and practice, once or twice a week, some of the drawers and cabinet doors would be open wide, and on occasion, a garment or 2 would be laid out on the floor. Now, Becky is an only child, and her parents had told her they never went into her room to respect her space, so how all of that had happened, she had no idea. So she tried to ignore it completely. Becky would move with her family a couple of times before she graduated high school, and each of those moves had the same result. Every bedroom she would stay in, she would come home to find the drawers and cabinets open in her room. Eventually, she learned to live with it, but she'd also begun to read about the paranormal, soaking up every bit of knowledge she could. It gave her little in the way of an explanation as to her situation. When she turned 19, she moved out of her parents' house to live in Toronto in an apartment while she went to culinary school. In her off time, the city afforded her the chance to attend conventions, where fortune tellers and mediums would exhibit their talents. At this point, she had exhausted any book she could get her hands on, and had thought that maybe one of the mediums could tell her something, even if it did reek of desperation. She decided to go that weekend. The answers ranged from both extremes. Some said she was surrounded by ghosts, others said there were none at all. She had both positive and negative energies in her life, the usual pastiche of answers you're going to get from a great deal of those types, I guess. One medium, however, told her that she was involved in a car accident in roughly the right age range. He said that there was one lady that had died in it. As he began to hit these notes completely accurately, it got her interested. He then told her that the spirit that followed her was jealous, and they can't let go of that jealousy. It was as close as anyone had gotten so far. On the drive home from there, she said she wasn't yet completely on board with that assessment, but it was better than nothing. She was on the highway when she was looking to hit her exit to turn into her neighborhood, and as she looked in the rearview mirror to move over a lane, she laid eyes on a figure sitting in her back seat. She turned around to look at it straight on. It was only there a moment before it faded away. She says it was about the size of a child, maybe a teenager, and it had just melted away. A little rattled, she still made it home safely. She almost ran inside the front door and up the stairs to her apartment. The drawers and cabinets around her apartment were randomly opened as usual. All the windows and doors were locked. Over the next little while, she figured out that whenever she started to talk about her ghost, there would be more incidents. Objects being in places she would never leave them. Visions of someone peeking around the corner of a doorway or section of wall. But if she just acted as if nothing was out of the ordinary, it would often be weeks between these incidents. She'd gone through all the avenues you'd expect. Motion-activated cameras to see if it was her simply sleepwalking, tests with sleep specialists, etc. The solution seemed to be to just not think about it, for better or for worse. The week after our talk, I did actually notice some things in odd drawers for no reason, and a few of our cabinets were ajar. One of the freezers was left open, thankfully wasting nothing inside. Over the years we worked together, I do recall this happening a dozen times or so. I admit a few times where I was working late with Becky. Sometimes I did see a shadow peeking around a corner. Just little things out of the corner of my eye. I would always be the last out of the kitchen and lock up, and the first one in. I would find doors open, even though I was the only one that had a key to these doors. After I left that job, nothing ever happened in that fashion to me. Though keeping in touch with coworkers, some people have mentioned that Becky's work partners say they find open doors and hear strange sounds during late-night cleanups. I always felt bad for Becky, because there are some things I can't explain, and I hope that stigma of forgetfulness regarding closing doors isn't something that had given her fits in her career. I really don't think it was her fault. Daytime Cleaning Haunt from SpoopyCleaner. While this may not be the scariest thing you've ever heard, I found it unsettling to the point that I could not wait to be done working at this client's home. I'm a 27-year-old woman who got laid off at my photography job due to territory takeover. While not the most glamorous job, I then took a job as a home cleaner as a placeholder. Unemployment money won't last forever, after all, and I was saving up for my upcoming wedding that year. The job itself isn't so bad. 9 to 5 every day, with promised weekends off, and the occasional tip from wealthier homeowners. When on a job assignment, unless notified otherwise, you're by yourself to clean these homes. Sometimes the client is there, but most times they tell you to let yourself in and lock up when you're done. We do screen our clients, so far, no major creepers. On this job in particular, it was my 4th week of being solo after training. I was asked to clean this one home that was originally a regular for one of our veteran cleaners. But that cleaner apparently left for unknown reasons. At least, I didn't get a clear answer as to why. Regardless, it meant that us other cleaners needed to pick up her clients as they came up. The home itself was in a very nice, clearly HOA'd neighborhood. Nothing inherently scary. And I was pretty happy to think that this super easy home to clean was the only thing in my way to my afternoon being free. I gathered my supplies and headed out. Once there, I let myself in. The front door was open, and no one was home. But again, that's pretty normal. After settling my stuff in, I gave myself a tour of what I was to clean. The place was a 2-story home, not including the basement, somewhere that I didn't have to clean. But as I made my way through the home, the air grew slowly thicker, like built-up energy. It wasn't so bad on the first floor, though making my way upstairs, the air was so thick I could cut it with a knife. My uneasy feeling only grew worse when I saw the abundance of Christian objects all throughout the home, and I mean a lot. Numerous rosaries, pictures of Jesus every few inches, prayers, and statues as far as the eye could see. Now, I'm not one to judge on one's religious standings, but this seemed like a bit much. Personally, I do believe in ghosts and spirits and all that, both good and bad, so that didn't help my mind going around the place. Eventually, I put myself at ease, reminding myself that I had a job to do and I needed to get started. I filled my bucket and got my rags. I started the 3-hour cleaning job. About an hour into the cleaning, when I was in the kitchen, I randomly felt eyes on me. I hadn't felt anything until suddenly then. It was like someone just casually walked into the room and began to stare at what I was doing. I turned, and of course, no one was there. Just me. My eyes landed at a specific space in the room. I stared at it for a good minute. It genuinely felt as if someone was staring back from that exact spot. Not maliciously. It was more like they wanted to say something. After a minute, this strange feeling disappeared. If I'm being real, I just wanted to be done and go. I didn't feel in danger, but I didn't really feel like being eye candy to something I can't see. I went upstairs after that, to the master bedroom, to do the shower. The shower had its own light source over the cubicle. It made cleaning a lot easier. That was until the light over my head just went out. I jumped a bit. I looked up and sighed. Great, it's on a timer, I thought. I groaned, getting up to reset the light. But when I tried to, it didn't turn back on. The light was legitimately out, and there was no other light in there. Just that one over my head, which was now not working. Coming to terms with this, I nodded, looking at the room, and said out loud, "You think it's clean enough? Fine, I'll go somewhere else." And with that, I went back downstairs. Now you're probably thinking, why weren't you reacting more? Oh, I was internally. Inside, I just wanted to run out and not look back. I could feel pins and needles in my neck, and my heart was pounding at the time. But I dealt with that fear by being a smart aleck. It's my thing. After that, here and there, I continued to feel watched. Something even began to knock on the walls and doors throughout the house. I just kept my head down and focused on leaving and finishing. When I was in the kitchen again, I saw a certificate on the counter. I figured it was something from school for somebody. But as I looked closer, I saw that it said it was a cleansing certificate from a church for this very house. I'm not gonna lie, this made me go white. Knowing someone had performed a cleansing on this home just sealed it all for me. So they knew something was in here too, and apparently it wasn't gone. That was enough for me. I packed my stuff and left. Of course, not without seeing a second cleansing certificate. I remember thinking, nah, whatever they've got here is here to stay, but I'm not. So I was gone, and that's all I've got to say about it. A threatening walk home. From KaiCarp. I was 18, and I'd been working at a small pub and restaurant, about a 30-minute walk from my home. My boyfriend, Levi, lived nearby, and would often walk me home since I worked late, till about 11 usually. One night after clocking out at 11, I met up with my boyfriend, and he bumped into an old friend named Harry from high school. He got to chatting and introduced me. Harry then proceeded to hug me without warning and asked Levi to buy them some drinks, and that he would walk us home to ensure we stayed safe as town was dangerous this late. Levi accepted the offer, despite my apprehension, and left to go buy a pack of beer. As he was in the store, Harry made some passive comments about me being attractive and being just his type, before he said, "You know, if you weren't dating Levi, and I just saw you walking through the streets, I'd have definitely taken you for my own." I laughed uncomfortably and brushed it off, before seeing Levi emerge from the store with beers. I rushed over to him and whispered to him, telling him that I found Harry unsettling, and I did not want him following us home. We had to walk through a thickly wooded off-road path to get to our place. He brushed it off and chuckled before telling me, "It's fine, babe, I know him. Besides, you're just uncomfortable because he hugged you. Your autism is making you anxious." This made me really mad, so I ignored him through the 50% of the walk and left him to drink and laugh with this Harry guy. However, I couldn't ignore him for too long. You see, I had dislocated my knee as a kid, and sometimes I still get some knee problems when walking too long. Therefore, during this walk, my knee gave out, and Harry and Levi had to rush to help me up. As Harry supported my weight, his hand fell a bit too low on my back, and I asked him not to help me up. I instead just used Levi to support myself until my knee set itself right. After asking Harry not to touch me, he got a bit irate. He started to talk to Levi about things that they enjoyed in a bedroom setting. Then he explained as he stared me directly in the eye, "I'm a sadist. I don't mean just a little bit of a sadist. I mean I like seeing people in pain. I want them to cry." At that point, I got really uneasy. I tried to show that I wasn't afraid, but I hid myself partially behind Levi, as Harry went on and on again about how much he liked how pretty I was, saying, You really are just my type. Your hair looks so soft and your skin looks incredible." Levi told him to back off. Harry walked off farther ahead into the wooded area. He then punched a tree before smashing a bottle and putting the lid half behind his back. He then walked back up to us and said, "All right, guys, all right. I'm calm now. Come on, relax. I'm not gonna hurt either of you." Levi stepped in front of me, telling him to back off and to go home. In response to this, Harry then dropped the smashed bottle, then started stomping away behind us, looking intensely at me. I could hear him muttering horrifying threats to my life, talking about the unspeakable acts he would commit after he enacted those threats. We had about another 2 minutes of walking. All the while, I clutched Levi's hand with an iron grip. I looked left and right and all around us before we were back out onto the main road. As we were just getting out of the clearing, rapid footsteps closed in on us, before Harry's hands landed onto our shoulders and he asked, "Oh, you live here too? Wonderful. Hey, I need to catch a bus. I'll wait for you guys at the bus stop." He headed off to the bus stop about 8 meters away. As he walked over there, I could see my dad driving down towards us. My dad parked the car and asked us where we'd been, and I saw that the time was about 12:30, which was way later than it should have been, given that our usual walk is at most 45 minutes, and that's if my knee is particularly bad. I got into the car and Dad lectured Levi as we drove off. During the lecture, I turned around to check the bus stop, which was only one turn away from our house. I saw Harry standing there, staring angrily at our car. Ever since then, I haven't been able to bring myself to walk around outside in our neighborhood at night. I do not trust Harry. Tales from the Break Room is a viewer-submitted podcast featuring allegedly true scary stories that happened on the way to, on the way from, or at work. If you want your story to be narrated on the show, send it to us at eriecast.com/submit. As of April 14th, we're paying 3 cents per word for stories that are approved and make it onto the show. Submission does not guarantee approval or payment. For a limited time only, PayPal only. Tales from the Break Room is an EerieCast Network original podcast hosted by Darkness Prevails. You can follow him on Twitter at @DarkPrevails, and you can hear thousands more stories read by him on our other show, Unexplained Encounters. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow and rate Tales from the Break Room on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can also enjoy plenty more horror-themed podcasts at EerieCast.com.